โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. One of the roles of Buddhist Sangha, monks and nuns, ordained people, is to follow the monastic training, the rules of discipline, and the ways and practices of Buddhist monks as an example to the rest of society. When you come into train as a monk or a nun, nobody expects you to be perfect or fully enlightened from day one. And the whole point of monastic training is as a vehicle to help you to get to enlightenment, or to help you to awaken to the truth and give you a way of training and a lifestyle that will support that practice. But we also are doing things or living in a way that we can be of benefit to the wider society. Maybe try to be a good example, set a good example to society. So living together in a harmless way, practicing contentment, simplicity, and taking the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha as our refuge, and dedicating ourselves to the practice as a way to help lay Buddhists as inspiration, as strength, as a reminder. And so, in many ways we can help the wider community in their practice. That includes even some of the sort of different, particularly monastic things that we do. So like, one thing we do when monks come to visit a teacher, or when they depart from a monastery to go off to another monastery or go traveling, they do a little ceremony called the forgiveness ceremony. And sometimes lay people join in as well, where we ask forgiveness from a senior monk for any wrongdoing we've done knowingly or unknowingly through body, speech and mind. Just in case, living together or in the past we've done something inappropriate, harmful, offensive to the senior monk, been disrespectful. Just in case that's happened, we've been, what we say, careless or heedless in our actions, then you're asking forgiveness and recognizing that may have happened. Of course, hopefully it may not have happened, but you never know. And that's half the point, isn't it? We're not always aware how we affect other people around us. And we may unknowingly have hurt someone, directly, indirectly. So monks and nuns will do this little ceremony regularly through the year, as it's very conducive to harmony, harmonious relations. And as I said, it's quite a good example to lay people, because as we know, the world is a place full of division, aversion, hatred, differences of opinion, differences between people that occasionally even burst into violence and conflict. So hopefully the Sangha can be at least one small part of human life, sending out this example of harmony and living together with respect and cooperation. When we do this ceremony, we do it in Pali, the language of the Buddha, and we ask forgiveness for any wrongdoing, body, speech, and mind. And the senior monk that you're asking forgiveness from will say, "Well, I forgive you, and you should forgive me in case I've done anything." So it's a mutual, two-way thing. And it's just the same as if you say you're living in a family. You might do this in one way or another to a parent, grandparent, member of the family who's going off traveling somewhere, leaving, going somewhere, or coming back even. People would probably feel awkward if they did it in Pali, but sometimes we do it in just our own language, whatever language you speak, English or whatever other language. And we often encourage people to do it with someone who's dying, usually the elderly or the very sick, just in case there's any unfinished business, accumulated aversion or hatred through life, which tends to come up towards the end of our life as very strong, powerful memories and emotions. It often catches people unawares. It's unexpected. Suddenly they find they've got a lot of anger coming up towards somebody about something that happened 20 years ago or something. Sometimes visual images, sometimes strong emotions, feelings come up. So the idea is the Sangha is giving a lead to the laity in this, to develop the sense of living with an attitude of forgiveness. We're learning how to forgive others and how to ask forgiveness as well for our own shortcomings, so that we can be more mindful and learn and become heedful. And this word the Buddha used, but it's not so well used these days. Appamada, heedfulness. Once the forgiveness ceremony has been done, then the senior monk gives a blessing usually. And part of the blessing, they quote this teaching that was given by the Buddha on the occasion when Venerable Angulimala became a monk and gave up his evil, deluded ways from when he was a layman, because he was taught the wrong thing. And he went around the countryside becoming a mass murderer, killing many people, thinking that would be the way he would come to enlightenment, which obviously it wouldn't. And so he was living heedlessly, but then encountering the Buddha. You probably might have read or heard the story where he's chasing the Buddha and said, "Stop, stop, stop." And the Buddha said, "I have stopped, you haven't." Meaning you haven't stopped making karma, negative karma, and creating suffering for yourself and others, which woke Angulimala up out of his state of delusion, and he became a student of the Buddha from that moment on, and then became enlightened. And the Buddha said, when we become heedful, mindful of our past mistakes through body, speech and mind, so it's everything, wrong thinking, wrong speech, wrong action, it brightens the world. It's good for the world, not just good for us, but it brightens the whole world, just like the moon, the full moon coming out from behind the clouds. And he used this simile in a few different situations for, say, like when we become heedful and aware of our past transgressions, say we've broken precepts, but then we become mindful of them, and then determined to keep the precepts. Or if we've been caught into a negative, unwholesome way of thinking, so if you're just thinking in an unwholesome way, you're not necessarily breaking precepts. But when you become mindful and aware, I've been caught into my depression, my anger, my greed, selfishness, jealousy, whatever, and your mind becomes awakens to that and realizes, oh, I got it wrong. Again, it's like the moon, the full moon brightening the world coming out from behind the clouds. Or even just taking on the Buddhist teachings, committing yourself to take refuge in the Buddha and say, I'm going to follow the Buddha's teachings all the way to enlightenment. Again, it's like the moon coming out from behind the clouds. And it brightens not only your own mind, but the whole world. And that's something to remember when we practice, because we often have this feeling of guilt when we're practicing the Dhamma, thinking, oh, well, I'm doing something for me, but I'm not helping anyone else. Well, that's not entirely true, and the Buddha was pointing to that. As he said, you're on these different occasions where your mind opens up to the Dhamma, becomes more wholesome, more skillful in that situation. You recognize a past fault or transgression, or you determine to keep precepts or to follow the path of the Buddha. That's good for you and it's good for everyone else. Brightens the world just like the moon. So if you take the Buddha as your teacher and realize or recognize the wisdom of the Buddha and the compassion of the Buddha, then he's just pointing to that fact that as your own mind brightens, as you realize your faults, mistakes, errors, it's good for you and it's good for everyone else as well. And I think he used the moon as a simile because the moon, shines down on the world, the full moon, without discrimination. It's impartial. The moonlight is available for everyone who can see, who's in a position to see it. Shines down on everyone. Even if you couldn't see it, it's still shining down on you. And that's like the mind of Dhamma. The Dhamma is freely available for everyone, whatever background, race, gender, and so on. So sometimes we do get caught into self-loathing, self-aversion, criticism. Even when we're doing something good, like practicing Dhamma, we still kind of shoot ourselves in the foot and say, oh, I'm being so selfish here, why don't I do more for others? Well, don't forget, you are already doing something for others whenever you follow the Buddhist teachings on whatever level, through body, speech or mind. So even just recognizing where you've gone wrong in the past, maybe you said something that you regret, or you did something hurtful to somebody else, did something foolish. That recognition is a moment, a very special moment, a very important moment in your spiritual development. And the idea is if you keep doing this, and so the asking forgiveness of a teacher or a senior monk or nun is one way to become more mindful. But you also have to reflect for yourself on your own actions. But if you keep doing it, then of course those unskillful behaviors will probably get less because you're becoming more aware, more mindful, or in the Buddhist way we say more heedful. You change. And the whole Buddhist teachings are based on this understanding that the Buddha had, is that human beings can change. Nothing is fixed, nothing is just destiny. I'm always going to be an awful person, I'm always going to be selfish, angry, greedy, etc., etc. Whatever way we look at ourselves, and some of that may be true, but it's not fixed and it's not permanent. And this wisdom pervades the whole of the Buddhist teachings, is that everything in this world, physical, mental, body, mind, or we say nama, rupa, is subject to change. Sabbe sankhara anicca. Subject to change, conditioned by factors and causes and conditions that we're constantly being affected by. So in terms of change, if you're looking at yourself, you are constantly changing, and your thoughts and your actions are being shaped by many different factors, different things. But if we develop the right causes and conditions, well, we can change for the better. We can improve our life and even have some effect on the people around us as well, for the better. We can improve. And the highest change, or the most superior kind of change, is awakening, enlightenment. That comes about through change, cultivating the right causes and conditions, what we call the Noble Eightfold Path, that results in the best kind of change for human beings, and that is awakening, changing for the better, changing some of those bad habits we may have noticed, giving them up and replacing them with good habits, and then ultimately seeing through the whole process of change that we call a human being, to the point where we say, well, there's actually no one here. The highest insight is into the not self, or emptiness, which comes about through change, in the way we view things, the way we look at the world. So insight into emptiness is actually a life-changing experience for the good, because the more you see not self, or see the emptiness of self in your own body and mind and the world around you, the more you let go of greed, anger and delusion, which is good for you and good for everyone. But it's all based on this idea or reality that as the Buddha saw, that people can change for the better. When we do come to take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, that's partly what we're taking refuge in. We're saying, the Buddha himself was awakened, a human being who became fully awakened, and the Dhamma is the truth that he awakened to. The Sangha are those men and women who have practiced and, following in the example of the Buddha, have also awakened to the truth. They can do it, then I can do it. And you sort of set out on your practice, and you have a chance, opportunity, if you've come across these teachings, to practice them, put them into practice and change for yourself, for the better. However long it takes, well, we don't know. Everyone wants quick change. Everyone loves the stories of enlightenment, where people hear one talk from the Buddha and they're enlightened straight away. But probably the reality is, for most people, it's going to be a long-term change, effective process of causal change. But you just got to start somewhere, step out, take that chance or make that effort, and then just start and don't look back. That's what I would say. So the Buddhist teachings are all based on the premise that human beings can change. Straight away, this often brings up the question, well, who is it that changes then? Or, if everything is not self, the highest happiness of Nibbana is, we say, the unconditioned, not self, emptiness. Then who is it who does this practice then, if everything is not self? Who is it who keeps precepts? Who is it who makes karma, receives the fruits of karma? Who is it that meditates? Who is it that has insight? Who is it that has thoughts of compassion? If there's no self, and who's doing all this? And that's a very valid question, but really there's no one simple answer here, I think. You can look at it on two levels. On the one hand, there is a person making karma, there is a person doing the practice, there is a person making mistakes and then picking themselves up out of regret and learning and then moving on and learning from those mistakes. But at the same time, there's no one doing that either. And the Buddhist teachings are kind of almost two levels together, parallel or one on top of the other. Like a two-story building. You have a home, say your home has two stories. You say, my home. It's actually two levels. They're both yours if that's your home. So on the one hand, there is a self, and we have to use that idea, that concept, because it's very helpful for communication and teaching and reflection. And maybe you undertake to keep the precepts, follow the guidelines, undertake not to kill, because if you kill deliberately, intentionally, it will bring karmic results back to you. So you say, I'm not going to kill. So you use the idea of self in the beginning of practice. Then of course when you're meditating, you're just with the breath going in, the breath going out, maybe the sense of self disappears altogether. At that point you're probably not thinking of killing or taking precepts or doing anything like that. You're following the breath to the point where the mind becomes very still, peaceful, quiet, and the sense of self disappears. But if you reflect back, you can see, well, the keeping of the precepts, and with that sense of self, I am somebody keeping precepts, helped you to get to the point where your mind is still. Because you might notice when we don't keep the precepts, confusion comes into the mind very quickly, and we become full of regret, remorse, sadness, anger, greed. So the teaching on self, and you might say how to be a good self or develop the good self, is very helpful to us, especially in the beginning of the practice. The idea is not to attach so strongly that it becomes an end. It's a means to an end. The end is the unconditioned nibbana, seeing through self, seeing that this body, this mind, thoughts, feelings, memories, ultimately are not a self. But that's an insight that you may only have glimpses of, or maybe just understand intellectually at first, and you just have to accept that. You read the book and you maybe find it inspiring, or you hear the talk and it makes sense. And you say, oh yeah, in the end there's nothing, there's no self. Everything I take as self is impermanent. It's the condition, it arises, passes away. The knowledge, the mind that knows that is the unconditioned. And there's no self in that. You can maybe understand that intellectually at first, but it's something you have to realize through the practice. So you can hold on to the precepts, hold on to your meditation object, hold on to the Dhamma teachings you hear and reflect on them. As Ajahn Chah used to say, well, hold on, but don't hold so tightly that it becomes an obstacle. When the time comes, you can put it down. Or as the Buddha said, you hold on to the raft to get across the ocean, but when you reach the other shore, then you put the raft down. You don't carry it on your back as you walk up the shore. That would just be an extra burden. So we have to learn how to practice on these two levels. There's this person that we're training who makes karma and tries to make good karma and avoid making bad karma. And then there's not a person, there's emptiness. And sometimes you're focused intently on the emptiness and the mind is very still and clear. And sometimes you're just working with a stubborn sense of self. So you also have to be ready for a bit of back and forth. And that's part of mindfulness training and wisdom training, and training in clear comprehension, understanding of what you're doing at what time. You might say there's a time to be a person who is letting go of bad habits and cultivating good habits and practicing, so being kind, compassionate. There is a person who's being kind and compassionate sometimes. And there's a time when you're seeing through that to a deeper level of truth, a deeper understanding, and you're with the stillness and the quietness of mind. And these two aspects of the practice work together in harmony. That's the aim, is to actually getting them working in harmony rather than against each other, where you might be, tempted to give up keeping precepts and say it's all not self. Or you may experience some peaceful meditation and say that's me. And you have to be careful on every level. The sense of self or no self can trip us up and become a hiding place for delusions and attachments. So on the basic level, you could say, well, there is a self. There's a self who makes karma, receives the fruits of karma, keeps precepts, meditates. And on this higher level, there is no self. But you can keep both in mind at the same time until perhaps you have your own realization. And then it doesn't matter so much anymore. Say the teaching on karma, even the Buddha would talk about how people make karma. I don't think things have changed much these days. Like when somebody dies, people love to go to a monk and say, oh, where were they reborn? In the time of the Buddha they did that. People died and people go to the Buddha and say, oh, where was this person reborn? And so, occasionally he would say, oh, they're born in the heaven realm or Brahma realm or hell realm, ghost realm, animal realm. So that way of talking is there in the suttas, and Buddhists for centuries have been using it as a reflection. But the Buddha also said the more important thing is to focus on this life, this very life. In terms of karma, to look at what karma you're making in this very life, right here, right now. Because that's where you make karma. You don't make karma in the future. You're not making karma in the past. That's all over. The past is over. The future hasn't arrived yet. So we are coming back to the present moment simply to know what kind of karma we're making right here, right now. And so even when you're making good karma, practicing generosity, keeping precepts, meditating, it's a valid reflection to bring up and say, well, what kind of karma am I making now? But if you're making good karma, well, don't rush in to cling on to the results of that and say, oh, good little me. Pat yourself on the back. I mean, you can recognize when you're making good karma. It's not to deny it, but then not to cling to it with a sense of self. And that's a tricky one. Because you put all this effort into making good karma, it requires effort and sacrifice and discipline, and all kinds of useful qualities have to be developed. But like most worldly things, you can't help but not want something in return, and at the very least you want to be able to feel satisfied. Oh, I've got some results from my practice. Or sometimes we seek a little bit of confirmation from others, get a pat on the back from other people. Or sometimes we just want more worldly results. I'm doing my meditation, done all this sacrifice, now I want my privileges. I want my gold card or whatever it is in the world. Sometimes we talk about the difference between merit and good karma like that, punya and kusala karma. Punya is this term, merit, a sort of catch-all term we use for acting in ways that develop happiness for ourselves and others, so skillful ways. But there's a lot of worldly dhammas in making merit. We often say somebody who's rich has a lot of merit. But kusala dhamma means the karma that is for the ending of suffering, for nibbana, ultimately. And making merit and making kusala karma are not always aligned. So somebody may be rich or wealthy or powerful or influential or famous, but they're not really going any closer to nibbana yet because they can still be attached to all those things. So this is again, it's a reflection where we do need to bring in a reflection on not self, say in the worldly success that we go for, seek for, because it can be a trap. It can be a trap to the point where we stop or give up cultivating kusala karma, or the Eightfold Path for nibbana. And we take second best, you might say, and just accept, well, I've got what I need, I've got my wealth, my property, my money, I've got my praise and recognition from society, it's good enough. And the mind kind of takes the foot off the accelerator in terms of the practice and says, well, this will be good enough for me. I've got my merit, I've made my merit. Maybe we still do good things, practice some generosity and help people out and be friendly to people, but we're not really pursuing the unconditioned as such, not pursuing nibbana, not pursuing kusala dhamma in its true sense of the word. And this is the difference between punya and kusala, or merit and wholesome karma. Ajahn Chah went a step further. He said in merit, you can actually be drunk on merit. You can be drunk on the words of praise and the fame and fortune you can find in the world, and the wealth and the comfort of the world. All the good things we seek, it can make us intoxicated. And the result of that is we stop practicing. So introducing the reflection on impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, is the antidote. And that's the kusala karma, reflecting on these things. This is why in meditation we have these two aspects. You have the developing calm, and you might say still with a sense of self. You're calming your mind down, and there's me who is meditating, calming the mind down. But then introducing the reflection on the three characteristics: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactory, not self. That's where you bring up the antidote to a sense of self forming around even the peace of your meditation or the success you have in the world. It's impermanent, it's not sure, it's uncertain. Wealth can disappear, fame and fortune can go up and down. All the worldly happiness we can find that is so intoxicating, it's impermanent, it's not sure, and it's what's not sure, not certain, not permanent, is obviously not self. In a sense, it's a conditioned thing that comes and goes according to the conditions, and those conditions change. Quite often they're beyond our control. The reflection on impermanence directly leads to the reflection on not self. It's your safety valve, actually. The whole point of intoxication with wealth, comfort, all the praise and good fortune we can find in this world, it's intoxicating. You need a safety valve to stop that happening. And the reflection on impermanence is the safety valve. So you don't get completely deluded, crazy, stuck in the worldly success. So again, it's another role of Sangha, is to remind you the real way to ultimate happiness is through renunciation and focusing on nibbana, contemplating to see the impermanent nature of the world and all the happiness that you can have in the world. Your merit is good, but it's only good if you cultivate it together with kusala dhamma, with wisdom and understanding. Even the practice of metta and compassion can bring its problems, can't it? You have metta for someone, before you know it, if you haven't been reflecting, the initial metta, the goodwill, the kindness was good. You'd say it's wholesome, it's meritorious. But then you can get attached to them. You get attached to yourself as one giving metta or having metta. Get attached to the person who's receiving your metta. So that attachment can lead to love. So you fall in love with them, or just become so concerned, so caring for them that you suffer if something happens to them. Or it can lead to hatred when they don't reciprocate your metta, or they're ungrateful, uncaring, cold. It's like there's all these pitfalls and traps as you're practicing the Dhamma with this sense of self, keeping precepts, practicing kindness, compassion, meditating. And to avoid the pitfalls, or to have the safety valve so you don't go into the pitfalls, then you need the reflection on impermanence. And that leads on to the reflection, what is impermanent cannot be a self, shouldn't be taken as self, because it's impermanent, it doesn't last. So the way we get out of, ultimately, from attaching to this sense of self, even when we're practicing the Dhamma, it's a bit like a circle. You build up the sense of self, keeping precepts, meditating, listening to Dhamma, doing good. But as the circle comes round, you're coming round to the reflection on impermanence and the conditioned nature of things, and not self. Thought, however good or refined or wise it is, ultimately it's impermanent. It arises, passes away. Feelings arise, pass away. Karma and the fruits of karma is constantly changing. Ultimately you come round to the completion of the circle, and you're seeing that it's not self, there's no self in that. Nothing to be grasped at self, so you let go. When we practice letting go in Buddhism, it's not a simple act, although it sounds simple in words, let go. That's why it's such an attractive teaching. But it's actually based on a lot of previous practice and understanding. You cultivate precepts to let go. You cultivate meditation techniques and objects to make the mind calm, to let go. You contemplate, practice vipassana, contemplate anicca, dukkha, anatta, to let go. There's a lot of holding on before you let go. You cultivate what is appropriate to cultivate, so you hold on to that, but then ultimately you let go. And when all the factors of the path are together in the mind, then letting go becomes more natural, because you don't want to hold on to anything that's going to bring you suffering. But in the beginning, we're not even sure what to attach to, what to let go of. So we have this problem, who is the self, who is being mindful, what is mindfulness, who does it belong to, and so on. We keep making mistakes, don't we, as we go along. We do some practice, we do some good, and then we attach to that, and then we have a sense of self. Then we get annoyed with ourselves for attaching, so we let go, and then we give up the practice and feel depressed, and then we pick ourselves up again and start practicing again. Life is like that, and the practice of Dhamma can be like that much of the time, ups and downs. Doubt is also like that. Who is the self? Who's meditating anyway? Then you think you know everything. Sometimes you reach a point where your mind is very still, very quiet. You think you know. And then another doubt emerges later on. Oh, do I really know? Back and forth we go. So we need a lot of resilience and patience with this practice as well. And we need to keep coming back to basics, come back to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, listen to the Dhamma, cultivate that faith and confidence in the Buddha and his teachings. Because we still have doubt, then the mind, as long as it's caught into doubt, will have this experience of up and down, back and forth, in and out. One moment you have full confidence and you're on the verge of enlightenment, and the next moment you're back to square one, and it seems like your mind is just full of defilements and you're depressed, upset. And the sense of self is just shaken all over the place. One moment you're meditating in stillness and all the self is gone and you're at one with the world and peace with the world and everything is great. And then you come out of that and greed, anger, delusion, worry, fear, everything. We have to accept that. There's this back and forth or up and down in the mind. That may go on for a long time as this. You drag this self through the practice in order to let go of it. Very frustrating. But just keep going. So I've gone round a bit of a circle in this talk tonight, but maybe I'll leave the talk there and give you a chance to ask some questions afterwards if you're not totally confused.
Nam